Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
So today we'll discuss Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 7, Text 13. I apologize for the confusion before. Apparently I needed technical staff. Yatendriya Uparamaha Ata Yadendriyo Paramota Drashtratmani Pare Haro Drashtratmani Pare Haro Viliyante Tada Klesha Viliyante Tada Klesha Samsuktasyeva Kritsnasha Samsuktasyeva Kritsnasha Yadendriyo Paramota Drashtratmani Pareharo Viliyante Tada Klesha Samsuktasyeva Kritsnasha Yadendriyo Paramo I'll wait. We good? We okay? Yadendriyo Paramota Drashtratmani Pareharo Viliyante Tada Klesha Samsuktasyeva Kritsnasha. Somebody else, please.
Yadendriyo Paramota Drashtratmani Pareharo Viliyante Tada Klesha Samsuktasyeva Kritsnasha. Yadendriyo Paramota Drashtratmani Pareharo Viliyante Tada Klesha Samsuktasyeva Kritsnasha. Yadendriyo Paramota Drashtratmani Pareharo Viliyante Tada Klesha Samsuktasyeva Kritsnasha.
Yadendriyo Paramata Drashtratmani Pareharo Viliyante Tada Klesha Samsuktasyeva Kritsnasha.
Yadendriyo Paramota Drashtratmani Pareharo Viliyante Tada Klesha Samsuktasyeva Kritsnasha. Yadendriyo Paramota Drashtratmani Pareharo Viliyante
Muliyante tada klesha
Samsuptasyeva Krishna
samsuptasyeva kritsnasha
Synonyms: yada,
yada
when,
when
indriya,
indriya
senses,
senses,
uparama,
Uparama,
satiated,
satiated,
atha,
Atha,
thus,
thus,
drashtra atmani,
Atmani,
unto the seer,
unto the seer,
the super soul,
the super soul,
pare,
Prade,
in the transcendence,
in the transcendence,
haro,
Haro,
unto the personality of Godhead,
unto the personality of God,
viliyante,
Viyante,
become merged in,
become merged in,
tada,
Tada,
at that time,
at that time,
klesha,
Klesha,
miseries,
miseries,
samsuptasya,
Samsuptasya,
one who has enjoyed sound sleep,
one who has enjoyed sound sleep,
eva,
Eva,
like,
like,
kritsnashaha,
Krishna,
completely.
completely.
Translation: when the senses are satisfied in the seer super soul, the personality of Godhead, and merge in him, all miseries are completely vanquished as after a sound sleep. Responsively, please. When the senses are satisfied
when the senses are satisfied
in the seer super soul,
in the seer super soul,
the personality of Godhead,
the personality of Godhead,
and merge in him,
and merge in him,
all miseries are completely vanquished
all miseries are
Completely vanquished,
as after a sound sleep.
as after a sound sleep.
Srila Prabhupada's purport. The quivering of the living entity as described above is due to the senses. Since the entire material existence is meant for sense gratification, the senses are the medium of material activities, and they cause the quivering of the steady soul. Therefore, these senses are to be detached from all such material activities. According to the impersonalists, the senses are stopped from work by merging the soul in the super soul Brahman. The devotees, however, do not stop the material senses from acting, but they engage their transcendental senses in the service of the transcendence, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In either case, the activities of the senses in the material field are to be stopped by cultivation of knowledge, and if by possible, they can be engaged in the service of the Lord. The senses are transcendental in nature, but their activities become polluted when contaminated by matter. We have to treat the senses to cure them of material disease, not stop them from acting, as suggested by the impersonalist. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that one ceases all material activities only when satisfied by contact with a better engagement. Consciousness is active by nature and cannot be stopped from working. Artificially stopping a mischievous child is not the real remedy. The child must be given some better engagement so that he will automatically stop causing mischief. In the same way, the mischievous activities of the senses can be stopped only by better engagement in relation with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When the eyes are engaged in seeing the beautiful form of the Lord, the tongue engaged in tasting prasad or remnants of foodstuffs offered to the Lord, the ears are engaged in hearing his glories, the hands engaged in cleaning the temple of the Lord or making flower garlands for the Lord, the legs engaged in visiting his temples, or when all the senses are engaged in transcendental variegatedness, then only can the transcendental senses become satiated and eternally free from material engagement. The The Lord, as the super soul residing in everyone's heart, and as the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the transcendental world far beyond the material creation, is the seer of all our activities. Our activities must be so transcendentally saturated that the Lord will be kind enough to look upon us favorably and engage us in his transcendental service. Only then can the senses be satisfied completely and be no longer troubled by material attraction. Om Jnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Mukhaṁ Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yatkrapatamam Vande Shri Guru Dinataranam Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Svayam Rupa Kadam Dadati Svapadantikam Mancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vicha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Yidendriyo Paramota Dashtraatmani Parehara Liliyante Tada Klesha Samsuktasye Vikrisansa. Well, there are a few things to note in this verse. A couple of things we all have experience of. One is this business of, Srila Prabhupada says that artificially stopping a mischievous child's behavior isn't the real remedy. It's just kind of a stopgap measure. Anybody ever spend time in the corner? Come on, let me see the hands. I'm not going to be there.
What corner?
And how did that work out for you? I remember getting in worse trouble afterwards because of the artwork with which I decorated. Or getting the 5 minutes in the corner extended and extended and extended because I couldn't behave in the corner. It didn't work all that well. Sometimes it gave us time. I think it's meant to give us time to reflect or something, or calm down or whatever. But I also remember a lot of resentment afterwards, because it's 5 minutes when you're like 6. That's a really long time. And God, it's so boring, and I have to listen to my mind. And my mind is, mommy's mean, daddy's meaner. It just doesn't, work so well. So Srila Prabhupada points out that and I'm going to come back to that the real cure is to find some better engagement for the kid. It's just something that's more productive, more fun, maybe helps them grow more or something. Requires a little creativity on the part of the parents. Sometimes parents respond, no, they don't respond. Instead of responding to their child's behavior, they react to the way they were dealt with when they misbehaved. I remember my father writing me sometime, and I don't remember the context, but I just remember this couple of sentences. And I guess it was by way of an apology for all the times that he used a belt. And I still shudder when I just think of that sound as the end of the belt goes through the belt, which is he's pulling it out and reciting that mantra. This is going to hurt me worse than it hurts you. What am I, an idiot? Well, actually, it probably did. I think the most it accomplished is that it made me sometimes convinced that I was a bad kid. And I don't think I was that bad a kid. I was just squirrely. So But, so my father wrote me sometime in, must have been mid-80s. I think we were at Bhaktivedanta Village at the time. And I guess it was by way of apologizing for all the sessions with the belt that my brother and I both got. And he said that he was probably just kind of reacting to all the times his Puritan grandmother tried to beat the hell out of him. To which I had a couple of responses. Well, first of all, his grandmother really was a Puritan. The town that my great-great-grandfather helped found, was founded as a temperance colony. So that's the kind of Methodists my family used to be. Really hardcore, kind of just mean people. Then my second response was, that didn't work out very well either, did it? Because he still had plenty of hell in him when he was dying in '94. So this kind of stuff doesn't necessarily help. We need to be a little bit more creative. We need to try to figure out how to engage our children in activities that satisfy them more than the misbehavior, which is quite often anyway, a way of just kind of getting attention. I don't think they generally mean to do bad things. And then another point that he brings out is, or that we see it in the verse actually, is that when the senses can actually be stopped, when that agitation of the senses can actually be stopped, and this is the point of yoga. This is what Patanjali tells us at the very beginning of the Yoga Sutras. Yoga is all about chitta vritti, yoga's chitta vritti nirodha, he says in the Sutra 2. I mentioned this probably too many times in the last week, but since we are engaged in bhakti yoga, that's not a bad thing to keep in mind sometimes. Yoga means cessation of all this agitation of the chitta and the senses. And when the seer is thus situated, it can live in its own natural situation. In other words, it can live as consciousness rather than trying to identify with matter a lot. One of the themes over the last few verses is this misidentifying. So if we can learn to calm down, learn to identify ourselves as consciousness, then the miseries can be completely vanquished as after a sound sleep. And as someone who's had chronic sleep problems and sometimes fatally, almost fatally, been sleep deprived for decades, some experiences of long, deep, uninterrupted sleep. You wake up and it's like, what? Is that what it's like to be a human being? It's not every little thing doesn't irritate you. And you know, you actually feel strong, you actually feel alert, you actually feel ready to go with the world and figure out what needs to be done. So this is a really, this can be an amazing experience. Rather than having our mind and our senses constantly picking at us. Do this, do that, don't do that, don't do, anyway, all that kind of stuff that we're constantly dealing with. This is when a lot of people who meditate, and people, sometimes devotees who first get into japa and they try to really get deeply into really meditative japa, and then their mind rears up and objects and starts throwing all this stuff at you. You go on a 10-day meditation retreat, like a Zen meditation retreat or a Vipassana retreat, and people feel for the first 4 or 5, 6 days like they're going insane. Because for 6 hours out of the day or more, they just sit and watch their breath and are supposed to just watch their mind do its thing and not react. It takes some doing. So this kind of, the way it's presented in this verse, merging the senses in the super soul, it gives such a deep sense of relief, refreshment, that that it's absolutely amazing. But what does this mean, merging the senses in the Lord? In the super soul or the personality of Godhead? Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur's commentary is really useful. Well, actually, no, I don't want to do that yet. I want to do this other thing yet first. Yesterday, as we do, Radhesha and I engaged in after-class discussion during breakfast. And one of the things that came up was we were looking in yesterday's verse for the quivering thing, because Srila Prabhupada's purport, I mean, this is a leitmotif in that purport. It first of all, it's framed by that. Quivering at the very beginning, quivering right at the end of the last sentence, is quivering of the senses, quivering of the jiva. And then smack in the middle of the purport, again, quiver. And so we were looking in the verse for the quivering, and okay, so maybe it's a little bhavanuvad or something, you know. But then Radhesha went home and did some homework, and I remember I got on Facebook at some time, somehow or other, this is how Rasa chooses to communicate with me through Facebook Messenger, my absolute, just so you know, my absolute least favorite way of communicating, because it means you get on Facebook. And she said, it comes from the previous verse, and sure enough, you go back to verse 11, and there it is, Kampadi, quivering, trembling, sound familiar? Kampashu, right? The quivering of the body, quivering of the limbs. So this is a kind of a motif through the verses, through these verses. And Srila Prabhupada continues it through his purports, talking about this as the moon reflected on water also appears to the seer to tremble or quiver due to being associated with the quality of water, because the surface of the water has ripples because of even a light breeze, right? So it's this agitation of the chitta that's being addressed here. So it occurred to me that sometimes we need to address what may appear to be a disadvantage in these atomistic looks at these verses. Looking at each verse in isolation, and sometimes we look at it forgetting the context in which we find it. So one thing that I guess nowadays I say I like to do, I've found myself doing a little bit less lately for some reason, is when I read something in the Bhagavad Gita, read something in the Bhagavatam, read something in Chaitanya Charitamrita especially. Sometimes I just like to go through the chapter, just read the verses. Maybe not even the Sanskrit, first the translations. So I get a sense of either the narrative or philosophical flow of the chapter, how it moves, how everything works together in the chapter. And then go through and read the Sanskrit and the verses and the purports and see how they all kind of work together. This is, I think this was a habit that I had with Srila Prabhupada's books before, and it was kind of confirmed when I was in graduate school. It was one of the things that was encouraged. Oh, and the other thing I often do is, and I talk about this, I'm going to do a little bit of this in just a moment, is if you see Srila Prabhupada or if you have access to the commentaries of other acharyas, see in the commentaries, see what verses are being referred to in the commentaries. Then I'll go and I'll look at that verse, I'll read that verse, then maybe read it and read a couple of verses either way to get some context. Read the purport, and then if any verses are referred to there in that purport or commentary, follow those out. And sometimes you really kind of might go a little far afield, but that's a really deep dive into the idea being presented. This is one of the things we learn in graduate school. When you see a citation to some idea that somebody presented or a quotation that's being used in the piece that you're reading, then you find that book or you find that article or whatever it is, and you go and see how that works in the context of what the author was trying to present. And then you try to find, then they have these things, I don't know what they use nowadays, but back when I was in graduate school, we had these physical citation indexes. So there'd be an index to all the people who cited the person that you're looking at right now, to see how they respond to it. So it's just, you really get to know a lot about whatever it is you're reading about when you do that kind of work with the text. So I like to do that as well. But I was really struck when I got that message from Rasa yesterday, and I just thought, yeah, just look, we're looking at these, we're taking this kind of atomistic look, as if each verse were something by itself, but this is a chapter. This is, Maitreya, Vidura and Maitreya engaged in conversation, so we want to get the sense of the conversation. So it's sometimes, I think, a good idea to go back and just take a look at, a chapter as a whole, and so we remember where we are. And this is a really wonderful image, this quivering. The word itself reminds me, I had some personal experience with this. I had a heart condition called atrial fibrillation that got fixed a few years ago. And it's an electrical disorder that affects the top chambers of your heart. So instead of beating, to move the lungs out through, the blood out through the artery, I guess, or something. Anyway, instead of beating and just keeping, working with the lower chambers and keeping the blood circulating, they just quiver. They get this weird electrical signal, and they just kind of quiver. And if it goes on for too long, then because the blood just pools in the atria, and there's a chance of clot forming. And then once the clot gets out into your system, you have a really good chance of having a stroke. So then it can be dangerous after a while. So, and the sensation is bizarre. It's like you've got a hamster in your chest. And it sometimes goes on for hours and hours. Sometimes you get weak and dizzy. So this quivering, this image of quivering really works for me, because I had this going on for years. And so this quivering of, this is a really unsteady, insecure situation for the jiva, which is naturally secure. That's one of the qualities of the jiva that's mentioned in the Paramahama Sandarbha. When we talk about Ekapad Vibhuti and Tripad Vibhuti, I brought this up a couple of weeks ago, there's a quantitative way of looking at it, which is how Srila Prabhupada almost always presents it. But there's also a qualitative way. There's three qualities, and one of the three qualities of the spiritual world, one is eternity, another is, maybe it's awareness, I can't remember now, and one of them is security, which we don't have. And the one quality in the material world, mortality. So there's very, very stark contrast there. So, so this is a very insecure situation for us, to be always chasing the dictates of our senses. There's a place, maybe in Chaitanya Charitamrita, that says that if we're constantly chasing after objects of the tongue, we'll never be able to drink and take Krishna prema. We're always running around looking for relishable food. We'll never, because we're constantly going to be distracted. We're not going to be able to merge our senses in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, before the hook comes, I'd better get to that. Oh, so, in his purport, Srila Prabhupada points to a verse toward the end of the second chapter. Familiar verse. Vishya vinivartante niraharasya dehina rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartante. That even if we restrict an embodied soul's engagement with sense objects, the taste for those things is going to persist. The only way to really overcome that is to give it, as Srila Prabhupada says in today's purport, a better engagement, a higher taste, as we always say. And in his purport, Srila Prabhupada addresses the yama niyama, etc. of the Ashtanga Yoga, kind of reminding us that we are engaged in what is referred to in the Bhagavatam frequently as Bhakti Yoga. So practically how to do that is our engagement as Bhakti Yogis. I had Nectar of Devotion queued up on my computer, but I don't have it here. So I'll just have to go to Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which we were talking about yesterday afternoon as well. So this is at the very beginning of the second chapter of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. But the first chapter of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is it's called Samanya Bhakti. It's a discussion of bhakti in general. What's bhakti and what's it about? The second chapter addresses the topic of sadhana bhakti. So Rupa Goswami starts out by defining sadhana bhakti, and he cites Narada Muni at the beginning of the seventh canto. The first chapter of the seventh canto is saying, Tasmat kinapyupayena mana Krishna niveshayat. Somehow or other, one can think of Krishna by any of the favorable methods. And Jiva Goswami explains in his commentary on that text, fixing the mind also stands for the activities of the other senses, because if we actually engage the mind, the other senses are going to follow with practice. This takes practice. Krishna admits in the Bhagavad Gita, this is a long road to hoe, right? This yoga practice, it's tough. He says, but it is possible. And what makes it possible? Detachment and practice. Those two things, detachment and practice. And its detachment is also, we saw that in yesterday's verse, that practice with detachment is really kind of the key. And so then Rupa Goswami says there are two kinds of sadhana bhakti, Vaidhi and Raganuga. Now here's the definition of Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. So he talks about that. And then by way of discussing Vaidhi sadhana bhakti, which is the kind of sadhana we engage in if we haven't yet attained raga, if we haven't yet attained a taste for serving Krishna, then that means Smartavya Sata, this is from the Padma Purana, Smartavya Satatam Vishnu, Vita Vismartavya Najatu Chit, Sarva Vidhi Nishedha Surete Oreva Kinkaraha. So, what does that mean? One should always remember Vishnu and never forget Vishnu. That's the essence of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. Just as we saw in the very first chapter of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the definition of bhakti generally is engaging the senses and the physical and emotional bodies in the service of the Lord, in the service of Krishna, giving up all of the considerations. And then he says, Sarva Vidhi Nisedhasya Etyoreva Kinkara. He says, all the other vidhis and nishedhas, all the other do's and don'ts, all the other rules of the scriptures are intended as servants of this one principle. So that's our whole business as sadhakas, finding ways and means to always remember Krishna, to dig these bhakti samskaras into our subtle body, deeper and deeper, until eventually we fall in. Bhakti Bhringa Govinda Swami Maharaj was once asked, what's the key to leading a really immersive kirtan? And he said, you just dig a groove until everybody starts falling in. So that's what we want. We want to create these samskaras, these impressions, these grooves in our heart, so that it becomes more and more natural to connect everything back to Krishna, which is the whole point of these couple of chapters, especially that we've been reading here in the third canto. So that's the essence of sadhana. That's the essence of sadhana bhakti. Now, what is Raganuga Bhakti? Well, once that raga starts to arise in your heart, as the sun gets close to rising, then you get to engage your emotional body as well in Krishna's service. Bhava Rupa Bhakti. So that's a really cool thing. So that might begin to happen a little bit at Ruchi, a little more at Asakti, and then certainly by the time we find ourselves immersed in Bhava Bhakti, then that becomes the main part of our practice. Although we also engage the senses of our physical body. So anyway, a little bit about that verse. I'll stop here unless there are any quick questions or comments.
I was thinking when you mentioned quivering, like kind of like the nervous system, central nervous system, how you're quivering of the senses, like an impatience, and generally in that bhakti yoga kind of calms that you're quivering in that way.
Yeah, I mean, Ashtanga yoga calms that. But it's an autonomic nervous system thing. We don't have control over it. When we're really afraid, we shake. When we're really cold, we shake. When we're really angry, or do we shake sometimes? I just had this picture of Dhruva coming home to his mother Suniti after Saruchi's maltreatment of him. And he can't control his breathing, the tears are streaming down his face, and I see his little lips quivering, and just rage. Because he's only 5 years old, but he's a Kshatriya. He's such a Kshatriya that Narada Muni can't talk him into going back home and just being a kid for a little while and coming back to seek his big goal. I just have this picture sometimes of Dhruva just, and he gets home and his mother asks him, "Dear, what's wrong?" He can't even talk because he can't breathe and his lips are quivering. So it's an involuntary thing. So we calm it down. So with Ashtanga yoga, you calm it down, you calm with your breath. It's like, sometimes this was Dr. Andrew Weil, the holistic doctor guru, teaches this calming breath, where you breathe in for 4, count of 4, you hold it for 7, and you breathe out audibly through your mouth. And you do that 4 cycles, and you're calmed down. Your blood pressure, you'll find your blood pressure is lower, your heart rate, even though it might speed up while you're doing that a little bit, it'll slow down real fast, and you'll be calm. I use it for going to sleep, and it usually helps. Hasn't the last couple of nights, but so we get so Ashtanga yoga, you do it kind of mechanically. With Bhakti yoga, you do it naturally, right? You do it naturally by engaging the mind, engaging the senses. Srila Prabhupada's godbrother, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, once made a comment about the importance of that engagement. He said that really the real solution to all our problems is deep engagement in responsible service. And in the context in which you find that, he mentions it a couple of times, I think, it's almost like a definition of bhajana kriya, of when we accept initiation and we're systematically engaged in sadhana bhakti by the guru. Deep engagement in responsible service, because you have responsible service, you can't help but think of that service all the time. So you're always thinking of Krishna. We see Namacharya, Namkirtan running around doing so many things. Kusha's back there and she's got all these plates spinning. And I don't know if anybody's old enough to have seen this on the Ed Sullivan show. You got the guy who comes out with, he's got 2 hands, but he's got 6 sticks with plates spinning on him. He's got to keep them all going at the same time or something. Irina, the new kid, always looking for something to do. And if there's a beat missed, we saw this the other day, right? I was trying to get up to go read the quotation, and she was waiting for somebody to respond, but it took me a couple of seconds to get going. And boom, she was just right there. She did it. So that kind of always engaging, this deep engagement in responsible service, always thinking of how I'm going to please Krishna, because that's what life. You want to go back home, back to Godhead. There are a couple of things you need to know about that. There's no one there but Krishna and pure devotees. If you can't handle living with devotees now, and some of them are a little odd. Witness Mother Mangala. Brinda Devi, she's a little strange. She kind of moves out before. Purnamasi, always stirring things up. But if we can't handle living with devotees now, what the heck are we going to do when we get there? And the other thing is, everybody's thinking of one thing only: pleasing Krishna. So that's what we're trying to get ready for. We're trying to dig those kinds of impressions, those kinds of grooves in our hearts, so that someday, Maharaj Pariksit he was going to die in 7 days. We're going to die in 7 days. We're going to die on one of 7 days: Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. And it could be this Friday. We don't know. So, if we start digging those grooves now, seriously paying attention to digging those grooves now, and just when the other stuff starts biting at you, like the mosquitoes or something, you just don't pay much attention. Radhesha.
Maybe I missed it, but I was hoping we were going to hear Vishwanath Chakravarti's explanation of Dashratmani Parehara Viliyante, that merging of.
Thank you, because I was ready to do this. This is a fairly short 2-paragraph tika, but actually, let's look at yesterday's as well. Yesterday's was really, the tika to yesterday's verse was really something. So yesterday's verse was that misconception of self-identity can be diminished gradually by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vasudeva through the process of devotional service to the Lord in the mode of detachment. And Vishwanath says, how can the jiva be delivered? By bhakti generated from destroying the qualities in the antakarna, the subtle body, which means by bhakti mishra jnana, and then by bhakti arising from the mercy of the Lord through his devotees. Then the ignorance disappears. In other words, the devotees are the channel for Krishna's mercy. We see that in the very beginning of Madhurya Kadambini, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur points out that Krishna appoints Madhyama Bhaktas, because they naturally can discriminate. The Kanishta Bhaktas don't know how to properly discriminate, and the Uttama Bhaktas are so immersed in love that they can't discriminate. But because the Madhyama Bhaktas naturally can see different classes, the Lord, the devotees, the innocent, and those who are actually inimical, and they behave accordingly, then they can be counted on to give mercy to those who are innocent, those who are eligible for bhakti, and they share their bhakti with them. So they become deputed as agents of Krishna's Kripa Shakti. So they're the channel through which we get bhakti, through which we get that mercy. Thus the meaning is that the destruction of ignorance takes place by either jnana or bhakti. This takes place gradually according to sadhana with various degrees of anartha and nivritti. Today's, the commentary on today's verse, it's kind of two-faceted. He takes a look at the verse in two different ways. So he says, when is anartha and nivritti complete? When is the cessation of false values complete? According to jnana, this takes place when the senses and the functions of the mind are destroyed. This is according to jnana, don't forget the context. This is indicated by the example of the removal of the active senses during deep sleep. When the jiva, so deep sleep, REM sleep, we're having dreams, but deep sleep, the body's like paralyzed, right? The senses are, it's like everything's cut off. And what's going on there? There's all kinds of cleansing and repair of the brain and other organs and stuff. When the jiva realizes the Paramatma, Brahman, or Bhagavan, by bhakti arising in his as an anga of jnana, then suffering stops. An example is given of the complete destruction of suffering. For one who has achieved deep sleep, suffering such as loss of wealth or sons disappear. Another meaning of the verse is given now, according to bhakti. So that was a jnana perspective. This is a bhakti perspective. When the senses such as the eye and ear become fixed in the Lord, who is attracted with beauty and other qualities, when the eye, ear, nose, skin, tongue, and mind become completely absorbed in the beauty, voice, fragrance, softness of body, sweetness, and cleverness of the Lord, and no longer desire to experience material form, sound, smell, touch, taste, and thoughts, and suffering is destroyed. That's why we hear. That's why among the 64 angas of sadhana bhakti, hearing and chanting and remembering Krishna, hearing and chanting, worshiping the deity, beautiful deity of Lord Chaitanya, all and associating with devotees and living in a holy place. That's why these things are emphasized. Because they help create these impressions. He is, how is this Lord Harao, this attractive person described? He is by his swarupa, the witness of the devotee, who glances upon his devotee with mercy. He is the Supreme Lord, or beyond Prakriti. An example of complete absence of suffering is given. It is like a person whose sleep is not broken by dreams. We're talking about the dreams the other day, right? The sufferings of seeing one's head cut off in a dream are all destroyed. So it's by engagement in bhakti yoga that we get real relief, that the surface of our chitta becomes completely calm. Or if it's agitated, it's these patterns of concentric circles that you might get if you drop stones all in exactly the same point, rather than having the chaotic quivering of the surface that characterizes. If you've got stones being dropped, it's like each of us naturally tends to think of ourselves as sort of the center of the universe. That's how we see things naturally. I mean, it's, because Radhesha is closest to me, he's most important right now. Jai Gopal a little less because he's a little farther away. I was going to say my daughter in Texas, but she's really close, so she's always close. That's just kind of how we see it. So, I'm focused on, what's important to me. Jai Gopal is focused on what's important to him, and everybody like that. So we have all these ripples radiating from these points, and they cross each other and create this chaotic quivering pattern on the surface. But it's best calmed by engaging the mind and the senses in hearing about the Lord and remembering the Lord, so that we can become naturally fit, or actually going back home, back to Godhead. Is that okay?
My memory is so short and unfortunate that I've already forgotten the distinction between the jnana and the bhakti definitions of that. So the bhakti one was really stressing the viliyante uttara, the merging with the Lord, his soft body and seeing him and hearing him and all that. And the jnana one was this just stressing the samsuptasya, this deep sleep.
Stopping the senses. The jnana is like stopping the senses, and the bhakti is merging the senses And for us, the oneness, the merging is a merging of interest, like when we marry, right? We have one interest when we marry. That's the way it's supposed to be. And so, yeah,
Not disturbed by
so we
those
merge,
trees.
we merge in that sense. We don't, as Srila Prabhupada describes Atmani Kshepa or not Atmani Vedana as an anga of Sharanagati, he often describes it as having no interest separate from the interest of the Lord. So it's that kind of oneness, that kind of merging. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Grantharaj Sri Bhagavatam.
The